Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on the world of property supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And we're live every week on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn and our website propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you're watching on our website, leave us a Google review, and if you're watching on the socials, get involved in the conversation below. Our email address for any discussion topics, hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you want to get us on the move, there's a podcast version of the show available on our website and all main podcast platforms. Just search for Property Matters TV. So let's take a look at the week's property news with our property expert, Joe Joshi. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Paul. Good morning. Good morning to our viewers and listeners, wherever you are. And as always, plenty happening in the property market.
Indeed, there is. And let's have a look at this month's house price index from Zoopla. It's the UK House Price Index. It comes out at the beginning of every month and it looks back over the month previous. So home buyers, according to this, are benefiting from lower average mortgage rates for 15 months, which is supporting double-digit growth in all key measures of sales, market activity. The UK house price inflation is positive, but remains below 1%. So as you can see on the screen there, and for the benefit of those listening, 0.7% is the UK house price inflation to August 2024. New sales agreed year on year up 25% and 32% homes for sale marked as chain free, which we'll discuss in just a moment. Nationally, home buyer demand is 26% higher than a year ago. More buyers in the market as a result of more homes for sale, and many sellers are also buyers looking for a new home. The average mortgage rate for a new 5-year 75% LTV loan is 4.3% compared to 5.5% a year ago, and the lowest since May 2023. Intense competition amongst lenders ensures attractive rates for buyers, especially for those with larger amounts of equity. The number of sales is agreed at 25% higher than a year ago, as households have held off making moving decisions for the last 2 years to return to the market. Sales are up by over 10% across the UK and over 30% higher across the Midlands and the North East. But house price inflation improving but still sluggish. So that's an interesting one, isn't it, Joe? The figures for activity in the market, we've got sales agreed 25% higher, 32% of the properties with no chain, which is an interesting statistic in itself. But the house price inflation remains sluggish. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, primarily because I think you'll find that there's a lot more stock around now. And having more stock around, it kicks in the supply and demand situation more than anything else. So more stock means there's more choice. More choice means people taking a bit longer making the decisions that they want to make. And so hence there will be a sluggishness in the market because time is not pressing, where when the market is the other way around, when it's a sort of a seller's market, there's a minimum supply and buyers are keen to get on, they need to make their decisions much quicker. So I think the fact that there's good stock available and becoming more and more available as time goes on, that makes the market a little bit sluggish. The market is generally sluggish, but it's sluggish for a number of other reasons as well, Paul. And obviously the looming budget at the end of October is probably holding people back. There's so much chat in the media world at the moment about all the negativities about what the new incumbent, the Labour government, has brought in, probably not keeping to some of the promises that they said they were going to do. Lots of taxes on the horizon. Yes, the mortgage rate is probably a little bit more palatable, especially the fixed rates. The base rate, I can't see changing much from 5%. But of course, the fixed rates and the first-time buyer rates, etc., are being offered at a much lower rate, somewhere around sort of 3.5%. Some even as low as 3%, depending on who it is and how long the term is going to be. So those are obviously good news as far as the buyers are concerned. But the bad news is that there is a lot of taxation due, or at least talked about, and we'll know the actual situation after the 30th of October. But the truth is that there's more stock around.
Yeah, we'll come on to the future of interest rates fairly shortly, but they're talking about the fact that the increased sales activity supporting modest price rises is mainly due to the fact that there's constraints on affordability still, of course, it's particularly in the southeast and the southwest. And if you look at house price inflation, it's plus 0.7% in the UK across the board at the moment, which is up from minus 0.3% a year ago. But it is growing well. But if you look at prices, for example, in the southwest, the southeast, and the east of England, they're actually still only marginally higher than they were a year ago. It's outside of there, that places like Northern Ireland, for example, where prices are 5.7% higher, having underperformed the rest of the market in recent years. London has the biggest turnaround of the last year, moving from an annual fall of 1.7% to a modest gain of 0.5%. So there's still that regional variation, and that suggests there could be bargains to be had outside of main conurbations.
Yes, of course, it's always the main conurbations that sort of start the ball rolling. But outside of the conurbations, there are lots more choices to have, and the flexibility of those properties is far greater. Even though in the conurbations like London, like Manchester, Birmingham, and so forth, there are a lot more going on, but the demand is outstripping the supply in the right kind of properties, especially in like semi-detached properties. But there's plenty of availability in the flats market, and so that could tempt some of the first-time buyers. But at the same time, it gives them a lot of choice because there's so much more available.
Yeah, they're saying that, as you said a moment ago, rising sales volumes are being supported by more homes available for sale, up 12% on this time last year. Many of these homes are new listings from homeowners looking to sell and buy another home. However, not all homes are brand new to the market. As you say, a fifth of homes currently for sale were previously on the market over the last 2 years. While market conditions are improving, setting the right price is important to attract buyers. The same applies to the fifth of homes for sale that have been on the market for more than 6 months, still unsold. This explains why a similar proportion have had their asking price cut by 5% or more to attract buyers. These trends show buyers remain price sensitive as overall choice improves. Sellers need to price sensibly to secure a sale. And that's a really difficult call, isn't it? Because the market is so volatile at the moment. Getting that price is clearly really important. But how do you set it in the first place?
Well, I think we've had this discussion about setting prices and calling in the number of agents and the ambition of agents wanting to list instructions. So therefore, sometimes they will be bullish in their price in order to win business. But even those agents are now finding it hard to continue to work on those bases. More recently, the numbers and the statistics coming out with the number of agents that are having to close, primarily because they are not able to sustain the running cost. And that is mainly because if they're priced so high and they're not selling, they are actually feeding the meter from their own pocket until such times as such sales start to happen. So reality does come in, and I think really agents have always got to be more realistic. However, when they go to a property, a seller may persuade them to say, look, I want to try a bit more. I was having a discussion with someone actually only yesterday, and they was discussing about having the valuation. They've had 4 or 5 agents around. One side of the conversation was that they weren't in a hurry. Oh, nice balloons. And the other side of the conversation was that he wanted to sell quite quickly. So there was a number of scenarios where the agents had come in at 375, 395. Really, it's probably worth about 350, as one of them says, but they'll take it on for XYZ. And the seller said to me, so, well, you know what, there's no harm in me trying that, is that really? Because I'm going to be, if I can get another £10,000, then 10,000. I said, that's true. But these agents will have it on the market for 6 months or more before they even get closer to the number you're. So, what price do you put on your time? If you're not in a hurry, then why selling it now? Why don't you wait 6 months and then try when the market might be different? So the point I'm trying to make is that even if the agents want to try and be realistic, sometimes the sellers are not realistic.
Yeah, they're looking to get the most they can possibly do, obviously. The other thing I see, we did discuss this recently, but I suppose we ought to have a sort of a moratorium and a checkup on this because we've often seen on things like Rightmove and Zoopla and all the rest of it that people put offers over to encourage sort of bidding war. Do you think that's the right time for that kind of marketing strategy at the moment, or is it really got to be a bit more sensitive to the buyer's end of things?
Well, I mean, the reality is there's more stock. So as there's more stock, I don't think anybody can afford really to be bullish in their prices and say, oh, well, I'll try that. The buyers have a tremendous amount of choice. Without a buyer, there is no sale. So I think sellers, homeowners, and agents have got to become a little bit more realistic to the price that they're asking and should price it more keenly to sell rather than to look at. I always say pretty pictures on my wall are not going to pay the bills, and that's exactly what it is going to be. You're going to have lots of properties that are shown on your display, and you can tell somebody, look how many houses I've got to sell. But if they're not selling, then what's the point? It just defeats the complete object of the exercise. So I'd always, I'd rather, it sounds really, I'd rather say no and say, by all means, give it to somebody else if you want to, because the man hours that you spend trying to persuade a seller to do something, you may as well spend that time on someone who's actually genuinely realistic about what they want to do.
Interesting that nearly a third of homes on Zoopla are chain free outside of London. And there's 1 and 2 bed flats most likely to be chain free, as you mentioned, while in London, 2 to 3 bed houses are likely to be chain free. Do you think this is landlords selling up, or is this people embarking on a strategy that says, well, look, I want to make this as easy for people to buy as possible?
It could be a combination of both. I think it's more about landlords looking to sell up. And obviously, they need to sell it because it's vacant. They're not making any money on those properties. They may have managed to get their tenant out. And now they've embarked on the fact that they want to get out before all sorts of taxations come into play. On the other hand, there are people that may be going through personal circumstances, which may mean that they can vacate the property and move into either a partner or go and rent somewhere themselves, or they're going through a separation. So there's a whole bunch of issues that could probably drive that. But mostly, I think it's down to the fact that a lot of landlords have decided that it's time. It's time on the lettings market because these whole rules about not just the taxation pool, the whole scenario about the change from the section 21 to the new rules that they want to bring in are just, as I said to you in our last episode, they are just not fair on those landlords, and they're just thinking, well, you know what? Why do I want to get involved into a situation where I could end up having a tenant that could be in there for months on, arguing forever and not paying me either? So, I'd rather just take my money now and, maybe go on a world cruise.
Yeah, higher mortgage rates have forced some landlords into selling, of course, with 13% of homes for sale being previously rented. Most of these, 53%, are in London and the South East, where modest yields, higher mortgage rates and low house price growth have impacted returns for investors over recent years. And of course, the budget at the end of the month is going to be a key moment for some of these people. This will be the switch that turns it for them, maybe. And if you add into that, of course, many English councils planning to double council tax for second homes for next year. Coastal and rural postal areas, including Truro, Torquay, Exeter, Lincoln and Bournemouth, have all seen available supply increase by over 40%, which is partly as a result of tax changes. Annual house price growth is negative in these areas, with rising supply keeping prices in check. So let's just unpick that for a second then, and talk about landlords. This really will be, I guess, the impact on things like CGT, for example, will be a big decider for those landlords. And I guess that will be good news for first-time buyers, but probably not good for investors.
Well, it's lousy news for investors, and it actually is a very, very poor decision for the government, because if they're having an exodus from landlords who are not willing to continue to purchase properties to rent out, then the big pressure actually is not on the landlords and the sellers and so forth. The big pressure is on the government because they've got to find homes and housing for all those people that are becoming homeless, and that is a huge number. We haven't even looked at that number. The number of homeless now and people waiting on council lists is just growing. It's not just the asylum seekers are sitting in four-star hotels and the council paying lots of money for it. There are ordinary people now. It's got nothing to do with asylum seekers and immigration people. It's actually genuinely ordinary British people who are not in a position to continue to live in the flats and the properties that they are because the landlords have said we want them vacant to sell. They are now having to go into temporary accommodation, and the councils are having to foot the bill for that. So I just don't see where any of these bodies are actually trying to make sense in trying to almost push the whole burden on landlords.
I guess if you're looking to retire by the sea, it's going to be good news, isn't it? With 40% increase in stock in places like Torquay, Exeter, Lincoln and Bournemouth and Truro, all pretty places to live. If you're retiring, it's going to be bunfest for you.
Absolutely, and I think that when you look at those places like Truro and so forth, then all of those places are nice coastal locations. Prices there are not so much plummeting, but stock being more readily available means that there's more choice for people that want to buy to live there as a separate thing. And it's the taxation situation that's actually thrown a lot of these people away from there because they've got second homes. And it's those very councils and those very people that live in those places that have been making a huge thing about saying, look, we don't want to have people owning second homes here and not living in them, and there are people that are living here who can't afford to buy or can't afford to live here. So maybe their dreams have come true, and people have decided to sort of up sticks and come out of the rental market there, and that gives them a choice to buy their own first home.
It is an interesting market at the moment, isn't it? Because you've got people that are thinking, well, I really need to get a good price for my current home because I need to unlock the next place, and that's risen in price. So the more I can get, the closer I get to my next purchase. But at the same time, buyers saying, well, look, there's plenty of other people out there. There's plenty more fish in the sea, and they're making offers below the initial asking price. And as we heard earlier on, 37%, 2 in 5 sales are agreed at more than 5% below the initial asking price. So therefore, there's still deals to be done. But I guess it all comes down to this essential pricing, doesn't it?
Everything's down to pricing, Paul, whichever way you look at it. Whether it's pricing in mortgage rates, whether it's pricing in conveyancing, whether it's pricing in actually a purchase of the home, the guide price, and what they actually can afford to take. Is the whole thing is around pricing and what somebody can afford. And equally, it's the same as mortgages, what they can lend. I mean, if a lender isn't lending the amount that they want them to have, then of course, and affordability. So it's all price sensitive in every possible way. But the first start is always, is it something that I want to buy, and is it affordable? And if the price is not right, you're not even going to get an interest on the property. So it's got to be absolutely pitch perfect.
So to sum it up, the outlook is that the housing market continues to adjust, according to Zoopla, to high borrowing costs through low house price growth and steady recovery in sales. Expectation of lower mortgage rates, a real attraction for would-be movers, with some lenders offering, as you said, mortgage rates below 4%. The outlook for interest rates is far from certain, they say, though considering global events, today's fixed mortgage rates already reflect the extent to which financial markets expect UK interest rates to move lower in the next 2 to 5 years. Their view is, and this is interesting because it contrasts with yours, our view is that mortgage rates, they say, will settle in the high 3s, low 4s into 2025, meaning a modest improvement of borrowing costs over the coming months. Together with rising household incomes, this will help to improve affordability for home buyers and support sales volume. So they're saying upper 3s, lower 4s for next year. What's your view? I know you said there wouldn't be a drop before the end of the year, but what's your thoughts about 25?
I don't think at all that the base rate, the Bank of England base rate, will be reflected anytime soon. I believe that even the 0.25% that they brought down from 525 was probably a pressure that they probably didn't want to have. So I cannot foresee that the base rate coming down from much from 5%, you might get I don't know, a minuscule quarter percent or something just to show that they are. But I can't see. But yes, of course, the fixed rates, the mortgage rates, they will vary because of the money market in general, and that will be probably, and we've seen that already, 3.5%, 4%, depending on what it is. Remortgage market will be, around that sort of fixed period of 2 to 4 years, 2 to 5 years, depending on what personal circumstances do. So there, they may get between 3 and 4%, but I don't think the base rate will change.
Yeah, they're talking about in the industry reaction to this. They're talking about second homeowners and buy-to-let investors really going to feel the pinch at the end of the month, of course, with these changes. With some local authorities starting to charge double council tax for second properties, for example, that are left empty for more than a year. And they're seeing second homeowners really contemplating and maintaining whether it's worth maintaining a holiday home as a sound financial investment. What do you think about that? I mean, you saw people years ago snapping up these beautiful holiday cottages in Devon and Cornwall. Do they still make sense and stack up now?
Not necessarily. And the other thing is that people are looking at the flexibility. Yes, there are certain uh, uh, times in people's life that means that they have to go to a regular place. For example, somebody might say, okay, well, we've got children, and during that school period time, holidays abroad and holidays generally become really expensive to try and to give the children the variety. So they may have invested in a holiday home on the coastal like places like Cornwall, etc. And they're now thinking, well, that is not viable. Secondly, and more importantly, through Airbnb, they have that flexibility to be able to have a home as opposed to being in a hotel. So there is certain people that are still continuing to do that, but do it on an Airbnb. So therefore, if you were having a young family and you decided that you wanted to rent a house for the 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks that you're going to be, it's actually cheaper for them to go and rent a house through Airbnb for a month than it is to actually own one and then have double taxes, this, that, the other, all sorts of things just for the privilege of owning. So people's minds are thinking in a different way. In some cases, they're even thinking of that same scenario at flying abroad. That's the other way they're looking at it. But certainly, I think the way people are thinking is that they don't need to have a committed second home. They would rather have the choice and the variety. And of course, children grow up. They don't need that particular one house to go back to every so often when it's perhaps just the two left and the kids have flown the nest and they don't want to go back there again. So what's the point of having that? So there's a lot of things that people take into consideration.
It's going to be very interesting when those holiday homes, some of them go on the market in those locations around the coast, of course, because you can guarantee they're going to be putting them up for top dollar. And it's going to be very interesting to see how the market reacts and says, well, yeah, I'm not paying that, because with, as you say, plenty of choice on the market, they're going to have to price sensibly.
Well, I mean, you can start wherever you like. That's not going to be, a home is only worth what somebody's prepared to pay for it. It is what it is, and so they can look at it and wish that they could get that higher price, or they can be realistic and move on. That's their choice. I mean, if they can afford a second home, I suppose they can afford to sit there for a year and wait for the right money. Um, but those that are buying in those areas are limited. So even if they're first-time buyers that are looking to buy their first home in those sort of tourist coastal areas, they must have employment. And most of them don't have employment. It's a seasonal towns where the employments are seasonal based on the holiday times. Not every major corporation has moved its head office to Cornwall or Truro for the views of the sea and for the employees that live there. The connectivity may not be there. The communication in terms of rail, travel, road is not there for those people to make sure that they get there on time. So there's a huge amount of things that you have to sort of take into consideration before they start to say, okay, well, I'm going to go and live there and I could do that. So they are going to be dancing to the tune of a very limited audience who are going to buy. So either they're realistic and sell, or they're unrealistic and just look at it.
Interesting to see some of the reaction in the marketplace. Tom Bill, who's head of UK residential research at Knight Frank, said the unfortunate irony for the property market is that mortgage rates and confidence levels have both fallen in recent weeks, because this data is for August, of course. He says that lower borrowing costs would ordinarily drive transaction levels higher, but some buyers are holding back ahead of the budget. The government has warned it will be painful. If the budget is better than feared or largely as expected, we expect to see a relief bounce that will last into next spring. So I guess if there is a tough time, then there's going to be a lot of sales, and that means for agents, conversely, it's going to be a good half year, and that should spring into the new year.
Well, it's wishful thinking, Paul, and hopefully it will be a good last quarter of the year. But I think that we're going to have the adverse effect. I'm not trying to be negative here, but as soon as this budget is announced, which is what everybody's sitting on their hands and waiting for and being told, then there will be probably a mass exodus of landlords who are desperate to get out now because they want to make sure that they are just not going to be overtaxed. I mean, you have to remember people pay tax to buy a property, stamp duty, and other taxes. They pay tax on whatever gain they make on their income, and now they're looking to pay tax on exiting the property market. So the government is absolutely not doing itself any favors, literally taxing perhaps the only person that can afford to pay that tax. That's probably why they're doing it, because they're not getting the money elsewhere. But soon they will actually make this bone dry. And then what? And that's what you've got to ask the question.
Looking at it from their side, I suppose you could argue that if you're not going to tax the vulnerable and the have-nots, then you've got to go for people who have got, and people who own property have assets, and therefore, if you're going to get it from somewhere, you've got to get it from somewhere. It's like the motorist constantly battered for tax because you want to have the luxury, in inverted commas, of driving a car.
Oh, yes. I mean, the motorist is almost a need, isn't it, to some extent? Because even though we don't want to pay it, people need to get from A to B, and there is no way to get something from point to point. I look at it myself often, and I say to myself, my work does not involve me from point to point. I'm not traveling from one town to another town. What I'm doing is I'm traveling from one town to another town, and then having to find Uber or other facilities to travel to wherever I need to. Then I need to call the same person back. Then I have to go back, and time is just expensive. So you always put a price on that. You say, okay, well, if I've got to pay 10 quid, then I'd rather pay the 10 quid because it's actually cheaper and I have the comfort of my car. But when it comes to property, it's all very well saying that the rich should be targeted and poor, but if you bleed them dry, well, who are you going to target next? Which band of people are you doing? I mean, people are already talking about exiting to other countries, those that are wealthy. So they're not going to have anyone to tax, and yet they'll still be doing their business. I just think it's a very shallow model that they're working on, that let's do it this way. If they were actually sensible, everybody could win. But the ultimate losers in this is going to be the ordinary folk who perhaps may become homeless, perhaps doesn't have the appropriate jobs, and perhaps doesn't have the income to be able to combine the living that they want to do. So, I don't think a lot of thought's gone into it, and it doesn't matter who it was. I always said that from day one, whether it's blue or red, or yellow or green or whoever the parties might be. But the reality is that they got the same amount of money coming in, and they just got to decide how they got to distribute that. And each one of them thinks it's easier to distribute it to, rob the rich and poor and pay for the poor. But I wouldn't mind that, but I don't see that even the poor is actually getting anything. Go on to any street, stop 10 people and ask them, how do they feel? And not one person will tell you that they're doing a grand job.
Yeah, interesting comment. One of the professional comments industry comments that interested me was Many people will be slightly discouraged that there's only minimal increases, but the numbers today actually represent the healthy housing market. After all, we want incremental and sustainable growth in house prices rather than a roller coaster ride of sharp increases and plummeting falls that we experienced in recent years. It's also good to see an increase in transactional volume, which again is a sign of a healthy and properly functioning property market. This is what the new government will have wanted to see as it supports its agenda for sustainable long-term growth. So there's an interesting comment. Do you think the government will be pleased with what they've seen? And I suppose in a way that is a relevant comment, isn't it? In the sense it's accurate, in the sense that all the indices are going in the right direction.
Well, yeah, I suppose statistics will show that they're going in the right directions, but actually on the ground, they're not going in the right direction. People are not comfortable with what's going on. It is affecting their pocket, and when it affects someone's pocket, clearly it's going to make that's the decision maker. It's not about whether they think that somebody's going in the right direction or not. And at the moment, the general consensus that you hear on national media is that they're not happy with what's going on. So I would say, a honeymoon period is over, and we are beginning to see the reality of what's going to come.
Well, we're hurtling towards that inevitable date at the end of October when the budget comes and the promises from the Chancellor as to what or will not happen with the property market. So we'll headlong into the next episode of Property Matters next week at the same time.